Welcome to our weekly class in Ethics of the Fathers. We're in chapter 2, Mishna 12. The Mishna, the author is Rabbi Yosi. Rabbi Yosi was one of the 5 primary disciples of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, the rabbi who shepherded the Jewish people through the period of the destruction of the Second Temple, which was one of the most trying periods in Jewish history, literally saved Judaism by making sure that the great sages would not be massacred by the Roman emperor, Roman general, and brought Judaism into the post-temple era. And he had 5 students. That means these 5 students were the instruments through which Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was able to influence Jewish history. Rabbi Yosi was described as a Chassid. The word Chassid in biblical and Talmudic literature refers to someone who goes beyond the law, doesn't just satisfy his obligations, following the commandments perfectly. If you do that, you're a HaTzaddik, you're a righteous person. It means you do everything right. But a Chassid is someone who goes beyond the letter of the law, or to use the Talmudic expression, lifnim mishuras hadin, within the order of the law. In other words, not only do you follow the letter of the law, but you also follow the spirit of the law together with the letter of the law. Now, there were ideologies in other religions that dismissed the letter of the law, saying it's only the spirit that counts. But that's nonsense. If you only focus on the spirit of the law, you'll end up with neither the spirit or the letter. You have to have the letter of the law, which means that you devote your life to following God's will. If a person says, you know what, God wants me to do A, but I'm going to do B, but I'll do it with so much more feeling that it will be better than if I just did A. No, you're left with 0 because you violated God's will. It shows that you're only serving your own ego, your own self-image, projecting that onto God as if God wants you to do that. No, God wants you to follow the letter of the law first and foremost, and then instill within it the soul and the depth of that law, the spiritual meaning behind that law. So Rabbi Yosi was the Chassid. He personified the person who would not just follow the letter of the law meticulously, but he would also invest his observances with greater passion, depth, and love. So knowing that about Rabbi Yosi, that's going to help us understand the statement that he's making here in this Mishnah. Another thing about Rabbi Yosi, when he was asked, as well as the other 4 rabbis, what is the ideal path a person should choose in life? And his answer was shachein tov, a good neighbor. That was his response. So bearing that in mind, that he was the Chassid, and that his focus was on being a good neighbor, that'll help us understand what he's saying in this Mishnah. Rabbi Yosi said, and this is again 3 things. Each one of these 5 rabbis said 3 things. Of course, they said many more than 3 things, but these are the 3 things that they would repeat over and over again. They lived and breathed these 3 matters. The first one is, let the property or the money, the word Hebrew mammon could be translated as money, but by extension it means property. Let the property of your fellow be as precious unto you as your own. That you should treat another person's property as if it was your own. That's teaching number 1. Teaching number 2, make yourself fit to study Torah, for it will not be yours by inheritance. Simple meaning of that is that you have to work hard in order to acquire the knowledge of Torah. You can't just sit back passively and think you're going to inherit it without any effort. And number 3, let all your actions be for the sake of the name of heaven. Simple meaning is that whatever you do, you should have in mind how that is conforming to God's will and God's plan. Okay, so these are the three teachings. So let's go to look at these three teachings collectively. The commentaries point out that these three teachings parallel the three teachings of the men of the Great Assembly. The men of the Great Assembly lived at the transition between the first temple and the second temple. They were the ones who established Judaism after the destruction of the first temple and the 70 years of exile, Babylonian Persian exile, and then the building of the second temple. And that was a very difficult period as well, because it was a transitional period. Any time you're in transition, you're vulnerable. That's why cults prey on innocent people in places of transit, on bus stations, airports. When you're in transit, you're not here and you're not there. You're very iffy, your whole existence, and you're not strong enough to resist outside influences and pressures. So when you're dealing with transitional periods, you need the right type of leadership. And the men of the Great Assembly were those leaders. And the last member of that group was Shimon HaTzaddik, Shimon the righteous man. And he said the world stands on three things: on Torah, study of Torah; avoda, service, which refers specifically to the sacrifices in the temple. And since the destruction of the temple, it includes prayer. That's the service, serving God. And the third thing are acts of loving kindness. So those three things are mentioned here as well. The property of your fellow be as precious unto you as your own. That's acts of kindness. That shows how kind you are, that you are sensitive to the property of other people. Make yourself fit to study Torah obviously corresponds to and parallels Torah study, the other pillar. And let all your actions be for the sake of heaven. That parallels avoda, service, that you should serve God in everything that you do. The only difference is the order. The order in the Shimon HaTzaddik is first Torah, then service, then acts of kindness. Here the order is acts of kindness, Torah, and service. Why the reversal of the order? So the simple answer is Shimon HaTzaddik was trying to give us the order in order for us to implement God's will. You have to first have guidance. You have to know what to do and when to do it, how to do it, where to do it. The first thing you have to have is Torah. If a person doesn't have the guidance, the knowledge, the direction, and they can have good intentions, but the path to the other place is paved with good intentions, you have to have knowledge. Judaism always accentuated the importance of the study of Torah, because without that, you can be lost with all your good intentions. So Shimon HaTzaddik says the first thing is you have to have the knowledge. The second thing is you have to have the feelings, the heart. The service of God involves prayer. Prayer is called the service of the heart. You have to translate your knowledge into emotion. Judaism cannot be just cold, mechanical observance. You have to have feeling. And prayer is what gives you that feeling, instills that feeling. But it's not enough to have knowledge and feeling. You have to implement the ideals in action. That's what he means by loving acts of kindness, where you actually translate your knowledge, where to go and how to go, when to go, how to help someone, and you have the feelings as well, and that is all translated into action. That's the order that Shimon HaTzaddik puts it. Here we're talking about someone who accentuates the importance of having a good neighbor. This is Rabbi Yosi's contribution, the importance of having a good neighbor and being a good neighbor. A good neighbor doesn't necessarily refer to someone who lives next door to you. A good neighbor means someone who you have association with, you have an acquaintance with. Not a close friend necessarily, but other people with whom you come in contact. The first thing you have to know is you have to treat the other person's property with respect. It's not enough to treat them with respect. You have to treat their property with respect. And that's something that society is very much lacking, where people think they can take liberties with other people's property. People who are dishonest and in business, for example, they're hurting their neighbor. Again, the neighbor doesn't mean the person living next door. Doesn't necessarily mean only the person living next door. It means people with whom we have a business association could also be called a neighbor. It's not a good friend, but it's someone we have acquaintances with. You have to treat the other person's property with the same way you would treat your own. That's the first lesson. And then he goes back to the other 2 points, the importance of learning Torah and the importance of acts of kindness, the importance of service of the heart, that everything you do you do for the sake of heaven. Now all these 3 points all flow from one premise. Again, Rabbi Yosi is the Chassid. What is the Chassid? The person who says, I'm not content, I'm not satisfied with just following the law. When it comes to American or civil law, secular law, you don't have to be a Chassid. You don't have to go beyond. You pay your taxes, you don't say, well, you know what, I paid my taxes, but I want to pay more extra taxes. That's a sin, to pay extra. You want to give extra, give it to charity. Don't give it to the government. The government requires paying taxes, so you have no choice. You have to pay taxes, but you do so reluctantly. Not, I'm thrilled that I can pay taxes. No, you have to pay because the government needs the money, and some of it goes for good causes. But if you really want to help, you do it in a different context of charity. So people who say, you know what, I will follow the law, I'm not going to steal, I'm not going to cheat, I'm not going to defraud someone, but I don't have to treat someone else's property the way I would treat my own. I don't have to go out of my way. For example, if you are the owner of a business, you're going to make sure that every minute of the day is devoted to making sure your business runs smoothly and the business is profitable. But if you're only an employee, you could say, you know what, I'll do my job in the most minimal way and I'll satisfy my obligation. Legally, you didn't do anything wrong. But morally, you're not a chassid, because you're making a distinction between someone else's property and your own property. If you don't respect the other person's property the way you do your own, you're not a sinner, you didn't do anything wrong, there was no fraud, but it's not really a sign that you are a chassid. I remember I had a student that got a summer job in the post office, and he was very conscientious about his job. This was maybe his first job, or he really wanted it, so he was really hustling and really doing hard work and running back and forth, and they told him, slow down, don't, you know, you're making us look bad. They told him not to be as conscientious as he wanted to be. And then some of the mail would fall out, and they would then, at the end of the day, they would sweep it up and put it in a bin. It would go for the next day. So he tried picking up the mail that fell on the floor. I told him, no, you can't do that. We hire a special person to do that. In other words, I can't say that this is true in every worker in the post office, but it seems that government workers are tzaddikim. They're righteous. They do everything right, but they're not chassidim. They don't go beyond the law. If you don't treat the other person's property the way you treat your own, then there's something is lacking. Now, according to Jewish law is pretty strict about how you have to deal with another person's loss. If you see someone is about to lose some money, someone's property is about to be damaged, and you could stop the damage, you are obligated to do so. And it's based on two different principles. In one place, the Torah, when it talks about retrieving a lost object, someone loses property, there's a mitzvah to return it. So that mitzvah of returning a lost object would require you, if you see someone about to suffer a loss, it's not just a lost object. Let's say there's a flood coming in the direction of someone's property, and you could divert the flood, that it shouldn't go into anyone's property to destroy it. You have a mitzvah, you have an obligation to do it. There's another law that says you shouldn't stand idly on the blood of your fellow, which means if you see someone about to be killed or harmed, you have to get in the way and prevent it if you could. Whether you have to risk your life is a separate question, which we won't go into now. But the same thing applies when you see someone else's property about to be destroyed. You have a mitzvah, you have an obligation to try to prevent it. Again, there are certain. What happens if, to save someone else's property, you're going to suffer a financial loss yourself? Then that goes into different questions. How much is your own financial loss? How much do you have to sustain? How much of a loss do you have to sustain? Do you have to sustain a loss? But Rabbi Yosi is saying you have to go beyond that. Even if you're not obligated, you should do it anyhow. So that's the first law, that go beyond the law. Treat the other person's property with respect. The Talmud tells a story of a rabbi, Mar Zutra. There was a theft, and there were different people around that were potential suspects, and no one knew who the thief was. And then he sees someone washing his hands, and he didn't have a towel, so he dried his hands in someone else's coat that was there. He says, that must be the thief. The person who showed disrespect and disregard for someone else's property is a sign that they're lacking in their morals. And now, if it was forbidden for him to wipe his hands in someone else's coat, then it's not the Chassid to refrain from that. Then everyone would have to do that. But the point of it there is that the commentaries bring as a support for what Rabbi Yosi is saying, that you have to treat other people's property with respect. You could think, money, what's money? Money is the root of all evil. Why should I care about someone else's money? But you care about your own money? You wouldn't dismiss it and saying, what's money? I don't care for it. It's a root of evil. But if you care about your own, then you should care about someone else's as well. You know, there's an expression in Yiddish that Geld is Blotte. Geld is Yiddish for money. Blotte is mud. And someone added up that the word Geld in Yiddish numerically adds up to the same thing as Blotte. So that money is mud. But someone else commented, money may be mud. Money may be mud, but mud is not money. So we like to laugh and sound altruistic about how we don't care about money, we care only about idealistic things. Yes, but when it comes to your own money, you do care. You know, there's a story told of a rabbi who would always talk about the importance of accepting even hardship and even loss with equanimity, without losing your composure. That you have to thank God for even the negative, just like you thank God for the positive. And he would always preach this. And he was a very wealthy man. He owned a lot of different businesses. And once one of his students got wind that the rabbi suffered a major financial loss, like his entire empire collapsed. The stock of his business went down to zero, something that happened. And the rabbi didn't know about it. So the student said, I'll volunteer to tell the rabbi. So he goes to the rabbi and he says to the rabbi, do you believe that if you suffer a major business loss that you have to be happy and you have to accept it with joy and praise God for it and thank God? He says, sure, absolutely. He says, would you even go as far as saying that when you hear bad news about your loss of your business, you would have to sing and dance with joy? He says, absolutely. And the student says to the rabbi, Rabbi, start dancing. And the rabbi fainted. And the rabbi fainted. So it's very easy to wax eloquent about how money doesn't have any value to you, that it's nonsense, it's blotte, it's mud. But when it's your own money, you have a different attitude. And Rabbi Yosi is saying that's how you should look at another person's property as well.
Is this mamun havracha? Is that haver, the root of friend, but it's used as neighbor? Is that true?
The word chaver means your fellow. It could also mean your friend.
Like karuta.
Right, it could be your friend, but it doesn't. It's more broad than that. It means someone that you have an association with.
Okay.
So if you use it in another context, it can be your close friend, because the root of the word chaver is chibur, attachment, someone whom you are attached. It could be a friend, it could be an acquaintance, it could be a business associate, it could be someone, it could be your neighbor. So that's the first lesson. You have to go beyond. The law requires you to do certain things, not to harm another person's property, even to save it, but you don't have to go overboard. But if you're a Chassid, if you're a Rabbi Yosi, you have to go overboard, and you have to treat the other person's property the way you would do your own. What's the second teaching? You shall make yourself fit to study Torah, for it will not be yours by inheritance. Torah is our inheritance. It says so in the Torah. And it's a verse that even little children are taught. Torah tziva lanu Moshe. The Torah was commanded to us by Moses. Morasha, as an inheritance, Kehilas Yaakov, the assembly of Jacob. The Jewish people were given the Torah as an inheritance. So, on one level, if a person says, I don't have to struggle, I don't have to strain myself to study Torah, I don't have to prepare myself, I don't have to exert myself, I could just be passive and just listen to the Torah being taught by someone and very passively absorb whatever I'm able to absorb. I don't have to exert myself. Rabbi Yosi says, no, you want to be a Chassid, you can't just rely that the Torah is an inheritance. The Torah is yours, regardless of how much effort you put into it. You have to give more, you have to contribute, you have to go beyond. You're not required, as long as you study the Torah in some level, in some form, you're satisfied your legal obligation, but you have to go beyond. And the third thing is, all your deeds should be for the sake of heaven. A person has certain obligations. Beyond those obligations, you could say, what else do I have to do? I did everything that I'm told to do. I follow all the obligations. It's not enough. Everything you do, you have to find ways of connecting everything you do to something higher, to some higher purpose. And we'll talk more about that when we get to that point. So that's the connection of all these three teachings to Rabbi Yosi, and that's what brings all these three teachings together.
May I ask one other question about, is this V'hatikun atzmacha, is that to repair happiness? Is that the way of saying to make yourself worthy to study Torah?
Okay, there are different interpretations of this phrase, make yourself fit. One interpretation is you have to engage actively to study Torah. You have to exert yourself. You have to put effort into it. Another interpretation is, no, you have to make yourself fit in the sense that you have to also be a moral person. You can't. A person could say, and the King David in the Psalms addresses this, a person could say, I could be a sinner, I don't have to follow the Torah, but I enjoy study Torah. And I can be a horrible person, I can be a rotten person, but I'm still studying Torah. And King David has in one of the Psalms, he says, Malach ha'lesaper chuka. Why are you studying my laws? You don't believe in them. You don't practice them. So does it mean that a person who doesn't practice shouldn't study? No, a person should always study, but you should realize that you're far away from the ideal. Person should realize that the study is intended for you to translate it into action. So you have to perfect yourself, perfect your midos, your character traits, be a decent person, a moral person. Legally speaking, you can study Torah no matter how you are. But Rabbi Yosi says, no, you have to go beyond that.
But this atzmacha, is that the root of sameach, of happiness?
No, there's no connection.
Okay.
Doesn't have a shin.
Doesn't have a sin.
Yeah.
It doesn't have a ches.
It's a different root all completely.
Absolutely unrelated.
Sorry.
Even with creativity, we can't.
Sorry.
Yes.
On that idea, I was taught that, we are supposed to chastise somebody who's doing the wrong thing, but if we can't do it in a way that is respectful and loving and can really propel that person to do the right thing, that if we're teaching them right from wrong and they proceed to do wrong, it's like they're more guilty because they're more knowledgeable of what they should be doing. And so we're actually adding to their guilt.
There are times where the halacha says that you shouldn't rebuke someone when you know that they're going to to flout whatever you told them. They're not going to follow it, and now they're going to be guilty of knowingly violating the law. There's such a concept, but it's generally speaking, we don't take that position. You do have to rebuke someone unless you know that they're definitely not going to listen or they're going to be violent towards you. But as a general rule, we're responsible for one another.
It connects to me with what you're saying about somebody who is doing wrong and studying Torah. He's learning what's right, but he's not following it.
Right, so it doesn't make it, he becomes more culpable in a way, yes. Bliss is sometimes, ignorance is bliss. But he'll still be held accountable for being ignorant. So you can't escape responsibility. If you use the excuse, I didn't know that, I'm not supposed to do this, so you'll be held accountable for not knowing. Judaism doesn't let you off the hook so easily. Now,
It's a mitigating circumstance, though.
you could say it gets you.
People use that excuse.
It depends why you're ignorant also. Sometimes you're ignorant. I mean, there were Jews, the times of the Baal Shem Tov, who were illiterate only because they went through the terrible pogroms of the 17th century. The whole economic system was destroyed. They were so poor that children had to go work to support their families, and they didn't have the opportunity to learn. Those people couldn't be held accountable for not learning, for not knowing. They didn't have the ability. So, of course, they would be off the hook. Now, when it says, let the property of your fellow be as precious to you as your own, what happens if you're a very spiritual person and you don't care about your own money? There was a Chassid who was actually murdered by the Germans. His name was Rabbi Yosi. He was a very holy man, and he was an extremely ascetic person. My father, right before World War II, was in his house, and the man started preparing himself for prayer early in the morning, would study a few hours Hasidic thought, and he would pray Shachris, Mincha, and Ma'ariv in one stretch. And after he would finish praying, which was already at night, he would take out his gourmet meal, a piece of herring and a cup of tea. But actually, before he would eat, he said, how could I eat without learning something? I davened all day. For 45 minutes, he would learn some Torah. My father even knew exactly what he was learning, he told me. And then he would eat his breakfast, lunch, and supper, the piece of herring and the cup of tea. And then after that, he would study Torah the rest of the night. He would put his head down for a few minutes at a time. He would hardly eat or sleep. But then he once had a guest in his house, a child, who craved chalava. And of course, he didn't have any in his house. He spent a whole day traveling around town looking for it for that child. In other words, for him, it had zero value, but he appreciated that it had value for someone else. He didn't go by his own standards. So that's another level that Rabbi Yosi is not addressing. Rabbi Yosi is addressing the person for whom money does have value. But my question is, why should money have value to anyone? It says when Mashiach will come, all the delicacies will be as abundant as the dust of the earth. Which means that if you crave the delicacies, you'll have as much as you want, but it won't have any value to you. So if it doesn't have any value to you, why would you care about someone else? If your own property you neglect, let's say you're a person who neglects your own property, you don't take care of your own property, but you should take care of your neighbor's property. But why should you if you don't care about your own? So the answer is, there's no such thing as not caring about your own in Judaism, because everything that God gives you has purpose and value. If it doesn't have the value that most people assign to it, it doesn't mean it doesn't have any value. Just like the difference between our soul and our body, some people believe that the body is negative, is evil. We have to scorn the body, we have to punish the body, we have to neglect the body. it's only the soul that counts. And there was a strain of thought in Judaism that did focus on ascetic behavior, where you neglect your physical being. And certainly you wouldn't care about money, you wouldn't care about property. But that is not the approach of most schools of Jewish thought. Maimonides was totally against that, and the Hasidic tradition was certainly against that, against asceticism, against devaluing the value of the body and of property. But they looked at it in a different way, and to explain it, I'll refer to a question that was asked by a colleague of mine, a halachic question, a legal question. When you want to get married, you have to give the woman, the husband-to-be, has to give the bride an article of value, and the custom is to give a ring. The ring has to have value. If the ring has no, if you just picked up the ring in a dollar store, and a little plastic ring that a little child will play with, and it's not worth even a penny, and you give that to the woman, she's not married. It has to have value. So my colleague asked yes?
So Shabbat Pruta.
Is it?
That's what we say in the Chuppah. You say Shabbat Pruta.
Yeah.
It has to be worth a pruta, right?
It's a
Pruta
dollar.
is like a pen.
I'm not sure. No. A pruta is the Talmud.
You had a Pruta from
Depends who
computer
you're
times.
asking.
Did you work-
No. A penny is worthless today. Literally, it's worthless. It's not even worth a penny. But if it has no value, if you pick up some dirt and you give it to the woman and say, "I'm marrying you with this dirt," obviously it's worthless. It has no value. So if when Mashiach comes, all the delicacies, gold will have no value, because the gold will be as abundant as dust of the earth. How are you going to get married when Mashiach comes? That was the question my colleague asked. And to me, that's not a question, because how do we value things? Everything that we value is relative to something else. Nothing has, we don't see the intrinsic value in gold. What's intrinsic value? Gold is worth a lot because it's you don't have it in such abundance. But if everything in this world would be made out of gold, and we would go to our backyard and scoop up gold by the barrel full, it wouldn't have any value. No one would pay a penny for it. You know, there's a midrash that tells a story of a guy who was traveling on a boat, and he was a very wealthy businessman, and he was shipwrecked, and he manages to survive by holding on to a piece of driftwood, and he ends up in an island, and he looks around, and he sees diamonds on the ground. He says, "Wow," and he picks up a few diamonds, and he takes it with him. And then he goes and he finds out that it's an inhabited place. There's a restaurant, and he's hungry now. So he goes in and orders a meal, and when he has to pay, he takes out a diamond and says, "You could keep the change." And the guy says, "Are you kidding? Diamonds are worthless here. We have, the whole place is covered with diamonds. We don't really place any value on diamonds. So how do you pay? You pay with onions. Onions are rare." So he washes the dishes, of course, because he didn't have any money to pay, and he earns a few onions. But he's a smart businessman, and he amasses a great fortune, wagon loads, shiploads of onions. When he feels he has enough onions, enough wealth, he travels back to his hometown. By the time he gets there, the onions made such a stench that people in the whole port city could smell the onions. And he's bragging about the wealth that he acquired. And that's a parable that's used to describe how people value things in this world. And they don't realize that what you should value are the mitzvahs that you do. Because in the next world, everything you valued here, all the gold and silver and all the material things will have no value in the next world. But, so the question is, how would we marry someone if you have to give an article of value? And the answer is, nothing in this world has intrinsic value in our way of looking at things. Everything is relative value. But things do have intrinsic value, because everything, the Kabbalists tell us, everything in this world has a spiritual identity also, has a spark of divine energy. And gold has a special spiritual status. So when Mashiach comes, we will recognize the value of, the intrinsic value of everything, not just its relative value. So this piece of wood over here, this lectern, will have intrinsic value. We're going to see something. We're going to look at our money, and we'll see not the value that money has today. Money's value is only about what luxuries I could earn, I can purchase with that money. But when Mashiach will come, we'll see the intrinsic value of our physical existence, of our bodies, of our property, of our wealth.
In the same way, maybe Adam named the animals, we'll be able to perceive the things around us clearly and see the true value.
We'll see the spiritual source of everything, just like you're right. When Adam named the animals, he didn't just make up names. Anyone can make up a name. He didn't call a dog a kelef because he liked the sound of the word, or he didn't like the sound of the word, whatever. He used the name because that name represented the spiritual energy that he was able to see was what animated that physical creature. We will be able to see the spiritual energy in everything, and everything will be on a much deeper level, a much more exciting level. So not only will the ring that we'll give for marriage have value, it'll have infinitely more value than it has today, because today it's only relative, and then it'll be intrinsic. So that's what we have to understand when Rabbi Yosi says that your money, your fellow's money, should be as precious to you as your own. Just like you recognize that your own has value. What is the value with our own money? The value is that we can do a mitzvah with it. We can take our money, our property, and elevate it to its true source, to its true identity, and do a mitzvah. A person who gives charity, what are you accomplishing? First of all, you're doing a mitzvah, first and foremost. Secondly, you're helping someone who needs it. But thirdly, and just as importantly, what you're doing is you're showing that you truly value what money is. That's why the Talmud says something very puzzling. It says tzaddikim, righteous people, their money, they assign more value to their money than to their own bodies, than to their own lives. So the simple meaning of that is that a righteous person is so careful about not committing any type of theft or fraud that they're very conscientious about money, so that they should develop a certain sensitivity to the value of money that belongs to others. So they're sensitive to their own money. The Talmud, for example, talks about when you lend money to someone, you should make sure that there are witnesses to it, lest if there are no witnesses, the person may not want to repay it. You should be very conscientious. You shouldn't just dismiss, well, it's only money, what's the big deal? So I won't get my money back, big deal. But you're actually causing someone else to commit theft. And the righteous people are very conscientious about that there should be no transgression. But it's more than that. It's because everything that they possess. Why did God give us our bodies? He gave us a soul, and He put the soul in our bodies, because God says, I want you to make your body a vehicle to becoming more godly. I want you to be capable of changing the world. You can only a soul can't change the world. The soul can only change the world through the physical body. Well, by the same token, why did God give us property? He gave us property because He wants us to elevate the property and to make it more godly. And that's why Rabbi Yosi says, if you want to really be a Chassid, you have to treat the other person's property the way you treat your own. Just like you recognize your own has intrinsic value, has a higher purpose. As he says later on, everything you do should be for the sake of heaven. Everything has a higher purpose. Well, if everything has a higher purpose, the same thing that applies to your own applies to someone else's as well.
It's also that a tzaddik values his money more than his own body, because it is the vehicle which he can do mitzvot on a much greater scale than with his own body.
Right. And the source of that is Jacob. Jacob was confronting his brother, and he sent his family ahead. And what happened with him, he started wrestling with this angel. What happened to him? Why was he left alone? Because our sages tell us he left a few trinkets behind, and he went back to retrieve them. Even though it endangered his life, he was willing to endanger his life to retrieve those trinkets, because he realized that God gave him that property. It meant that God wanted him to fulfill a mission with that. Everything we have, every resource we have, is intended for us to use for a higher purpose. And sometimes Jacob, a model of a righteous person, of a Chassid, is willing to go to extremes to make sure that his possessions are used for a higher purpose. It's not for indulgence sake, but for godly sake. Any questions? Any questions on Zoom?
Very interesting, Rabbi. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Very interesting.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll conclude this Mishna next week, God willing.